Good afternoon, everyone, and we're delighted to welcome you to this week's PMI Friday webinar, PDSA, your work, your project, your program, with my good friend and colleague, Des Kelly. My name is Rich Seddon, and I'll be facilitating the session. Des has passed his first test of today by ignoring the Zoom prompts that have so regularly derailed us in the last few webinars since Zoom changed their functionality. So congratulations on that, Des, and thank you very much. So back to today. I'll be running the Q&A desk, which we'll be using throughout the presentation. The Q&A and chat buttons can be found in your Zoom control panels. Please do keep your questions, comments, observations, and indeed challenges coming. It's Friday afternoon. Let's keep Des on his toes. Let's get some challenges and questions and queries put to him as we go through. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll send all registered participants a link via email early next week to the full recording of both the audio and the presentation. As usual, we're broadcasting live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So to all those joining us on the live streams, you're very welcome. To be able to participate in the polls, please use the chat functionality on those live streams. I've got them up on my screens here, so we'll keep an eye on those as we go through. To make suggestions for future topics, do register at pmi.co.uk/webinars, which is also where you'll find the full schedule and the bank of previous recordings. We're now many months into these recordings, and there's approaching 70, I think, now on there of all kinds of topics. It is searchable, so do have a look. We're getting lots of feedback that people are finding that really useful. We'll be sending everyone, as usual, a short voice of the customer survey at the end of today's session. We're really grateful for your feedback, suggestions for future topics that you'd like us to cover. Next week is actually the final PMI Friday webinar, and in January we'll be launching a brand new series called PMI Live. More on that next week, but really exciting. So any suggestions for the content in there, please do put that into the section on the survey. So without further ado, thank you again for all your support, and now I'd like to hand over to Des.
Thanks very much, Rich. Thank you. And welcome everybody from around the world. A very significant number of you are online today. So for whichever medium you've elected to join us, it's great to have you with us. So what are we going to be covering over this 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so? So what we'll be looking at PDSA, some history and some context. The one thing that has struck me whilst researching and pulling my slides together for this was just how much PDSA has actually been PDSA'd over the last 50 years or so. So we're going to have a look at some history and some context. And then as we're going to explore it, we might as well look and try to understand what do the words plan, do, study, act actually imply. We've got some examples so that we can actually see how does it actually impact your work, your program, your project. And in the end, a little conclusion from me, and this I think comes from many years of work, is that PDSA, when used correctly, will lead you to the opportunity of gaining wisdom. And that's something that we should all be, I think, hopeful of. So let's go first off then, some history and some context. And just before I delve into this, as we're going and I start touching on some of these aspects, please do populate the chat. As Rich pointed out, my week's been far too easy this week, so let's have a little bit of a challenge on a Friday afternoon. So, context. First of all, PDSA is a scientific model, but many of you will be familiar with a model which is very similar, and that is Plan, Do, Check, Act. So we have Plan, Do, Check, Act, the icon on the left-hand side, and Plan, Do, Study, Act on the right. Now, I'll explain the differences or similarities as they may be as we go. But why did I include Plan, Do, Check, Act in this is because for those of you who are familiar with something like ISO 9000, particularly the ISO 9000 2015 version, they do actually encourage that users of ISO 9000 should subject their business processes and their business system to Plan, Do, Check, Act. And you can see on that slide there, they give a good explanation of what they think Plan, Do, Check, Act is. We're going to look and see, where did Plan, Do, Check, Act come from? Where did Plan, Do, Study, Act come from? and then we're going to have a look at Plan, Do, Study, Act. Plan, Do, Check, Act, once again, appears, in this case, we've extracted this from the Advanced Product Quality Planning manuals that the AIAG have published. And there you again, you see Plan, Do, Check, Act. So Plan, Do, Check, Act appears. So we've got a fourth one, I suppose, or third one, should we say. So when we look at Plan, Do, Study, Act, one of the things that intrigued me when I looked at these models earlier in the week is that if you are participating with one of our colleagues in Germany, the Plan, Do, Check, Act icon, you can see what study is. It's learning and learning. And I think, strangely enough, that says just about everything you want in English about what study should be about. So I've given you a basic understanding. I'm going to ask for a poll now. So Rich, hopefully we've got a poll that we can do. So just thinking about your organization precisely, and the models PDCA or PDSA, which in your opinion is of the following most relevant answers? So when we think about PDSA and PDCA, answer one is we recognize the models and we use them effectively. Answer two is we recognize the model or models, but we do not use them very effectively. We do not recognize them at all is answer three. But if you have something else, then please tell us in the chat. That'll be absolutely brilliant.
Great.
So
and so for those of you in the live Zoom session, that should appear on your screen now, hopefully, and I can see some people have started responding. For those of you joining us on the live streams, I've got the chats in front of me, so pop your responses in there, and I should be able to see that too. And okay, great. So I can see those responses coming in now. So just keep my eye on those. So as Des mentioned, the fourth option there is something else. Please do tell us in the chat if you've got another take on this or a question, and we'll see how we can respond to that. I see lots of deep thought going into this response, which is great. Thank you very much. Can you see thought? I don't know if you can see thought. I can see people are taking the time. That's maybe what I meant. I start seeing thoughts, I know I've really got there. Okay, cool. Just give that another couple of seconds, get those responses in. And I know the live streams often run a few seconds behind, so as well, we'll feed those in as they complete. Okay, so I'll click end on that and we'll have a look at what we've got. So hopefully you can see that, Des.
I can. That's most intriguing, most intriguing. Do you want to give the results, Rich?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure,
why not?
Can do. So yeah, the overwhelming response. I've got no responses at all on we do not recognize them or something else. And we've got the second answer here. We recognize the models, but we do not use them effectively. Streets ahead. In fact, 3/4 of all responses are suggesting that that's the case. And a similar, just glancing across the live streams here, a similar response from there as well, from the people who are joining us. So we're looking for confirming evidence, Des? I think we found some.
Yes, indeed. Yes, all blacks, all swans are white, aren't they? I think it is. Anyway, so that's a really interesting one. I think it's understandable that many organizations may have heard of either or of the two models and are not using them particularly effectively. And so what that'll do, actually, that will stimulate me to actually try to as we go through this conversation, and please bombard the chat if you can, particularly with questions on this. What can we do as professionals? What can we do as professionals to facilitate our organizations better understanding the use and application of these scientific learning models? Because it is, in my experience, undoubtedly true that when you understand how to use these models, they have a profound impact on how we can transform the performance of our businesses, our processes, and our own personal contributions. It is really, 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 really important. So
We've got a comment, Des, just before you go on, sorry to disturb your flow. I've got a comment from Mark just saying that in his experience, teams often rush/skip the study phase.
And,
Mark. And also go straight, and also sometimes act.
So plan and do is what Mark is at. Mark, I think there are many within the PMI fraternity who could actually probably say we have similar feelings as that, because and actually one of the key reasons for why we would want to do this afternoon seminar is to actually bring home the life of what it's about. Now, actually, Mark, thank you for that, because you've actually, I think, set me up for a little bit for the next element of my presentation. And I'm going to direct you all actually to a paper, and if you can't find it online, maybe come back to us at PMI and we'll put a copy on our website. So there's, as always when we do these webinars, one of the things I find actually quite pleasurable is the research that goes in to make sure that we are talking the very latest thinking and actions on this. And so one of the things I did was to do quite detailed research to see who else was talking about Plan, Do, Study, Act, Plan, Do, Check, Act, or any of the scientific learning models to see what's going on. And I happened upon a paper by Ron Moen and Cliff Norman that was created and written for the 2009 Asian Network for Quality, the ANQ, an event which for many years PMI have participated in. It's been good, and Ron and Cliff they both are unfortunately no longer with us, but were real friends of PMI. And one thing about them that was really important is they actually worked with Deming and they worked with Shewhart. They were there at the time. They experienced it. They knew. And therefore, as one of my colleagues said to me, there's probably no better place to go than people who are actually there if you want to try and track down the history. So I'm going to actually show you over the next number of slides some of the extracts I've taken from the papers written by Ron Moen and Cliff Norman around about that time to try and express what PDSA was all about. And I'm going to fill it in with some additional information. So
there's just on that presentation, I'll whilst you're talking, I'll just check out to see if we've got a shareable copy of it and put it into this chat if we can. So bear with me, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, brilliant. It only just came to me as I was talking that it's because if it may not be searchable always, but it's a really
I'll
insightful.
check to see what the copyright setup is and see what we can share.
Okay, so one of the things that Ron and Cliff did was to actually give a plotted history of PDSA, and that's on the screen now. And as you can see, it starts over on the left-hand side, going back to 1610 or even 1620 with Galileo and also Francis Bacon, to learning. Galileo, a scientist, Francis Bacon, a philosopher, and they started off and they did some work. And as you can see, it progressed from left to right through pragmatism and Charles Peirce and William James. John Dewey in 1933 about how do we as individuals think were books that were written. And then we have the integration of pragmatism and empiricism. And that's from C.I. Lewis. That led to the 1939 Shewhart cycle. Now that's where I'm going to pick up the story eventually, is starting with Shewhart, because PDCA or PDSA are frequently referred to as either the Deming cycle or the Shewhart cycle. And it'd be interesting to actually go back now and say, well, are either of those things true? If they go back to 1600, the scientific modelling goes back that far, then is really Shewhart the creator of the Shewhart cycle? That was in 1939. Now Deming worked with Shewhart through the 50s, and he modified Shewhart's cycle in 1950, and we're going to have a look at that. What was it? And if we go towards the right, you can see that the Shewhart cycle was recreated again, and Deming this time recreated something called the Shewhart cycle, and that led us to PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act. Now, if you look down at this point here with the PDCA, you will see Plan, Do, Check Act came from the Japanese QC, and I'm going to explain where that came from in 1951. And then Plan, Do, Check Act from Ishikawa is as it was brought into Total Quality Control, or TQM, in the mid-1980s. We're going to back up a little bit and actually just go back to Galileo and Francis Bacon. And this is where we start to see some evidence of the emergence of scientific reasoning. There are many studies about where does scientific reasoning come from, and there are many people who are credited to being the initiators or the fathers of it. And I don't think it's necessary that we actually get too embroiled into who found what first, but it started. So Galileo, as you can see from this, basically has been considered the father of modern physics, or the father of science. Now, back at this time, back in the 1600s, science at this time depended upon what we refer to today as deductive logic to interpret nature. On the other hand, Francis Bacon, often called the father of empiricism, he argued that scientific knowledge can only be based upon inductive reasoning and careful observation of events in nature. So we've got two of the really, really important people in the founding of science advocating two different approaches to how science can progress learning. So how did that work? And so Bacon insisted that scientists should instead proceed through inductive reasoning from observation to axiom, a learned truth, if you like, to law. And so going on from there. So I'm going to have a quick look at the models. What I'm doing is have a look at the model of deductive logic and then inductive reasoning. And the reason I want to do this is because these are two models that work to explain how people learn, or how we can learn. So the first one then, deduction, this is the one that Galileo favored, the scientist. Now, he believed that you started with an idea or a theory or some form of hypothesis, which you would go out and you would create an experiment, you would study the results, and you'd make predictions about what might happen in the future. And therefore you could come to what is a conclusion. Now, there was never ever a suggestion that the conclusion was truth, but it was the latest conclusion. And I think that's an important thing. So that's the theme of deduction, right? Now, inductive reasoning, that's that favored by Bacon. He had a slightly different one, is you start with observation or study or experimentation. And it is then the study of that, what you find there, the analysis of that gives you the opportunity to derive ideas, theories, and hypotheses. Okay? So we've got this, these two heavyweights who are arguing different ways of understanding science. And the one thing that Moen and Norman demonstrated was actually there is actually a link between deduction and induction. And I found this little graphic online a little while ago, where we have this thing about inductive reasoning going down the left-hand side of that box, which starts with observation, then generalizations, which are basically studies making things to be sort of packaged in thought, which leads you to a paradigm or a model. Paradigm is just a very posh name for a model. And then if we come from the other side, so paradigm of theory is at the bottom, and then theory goes back. If you are going to use deductive reasoning, you have to make predictions and then experiments that you can study. And so that's the way it goes. So Moen and Norman were suggesting that the study of science is actually the gentle play between both inductive and deductive reasoning. And what I hope to demonstrate towards the end here is that how in Plan, Do, Study, Act, these two activities can actually play to support each other. Before I do that, I'm going to actually go back and give you a little bit more plotted history of Plan, Do, Study, Act, because I found this quite interesting. And again, what I've done is I've actually taken screenshots or copies of the work of Moen and Norman, and actually just brought them on without any modification, because it felt to me as that there was little reason me reinterpreting what those people who lived through this reported at the time. So this is on the screen now is the work from Walter Shewhart from 1939. And what you can see, he started off with saying that actually learning comes from, and I think the other thing that for me stimulated this is that these guys were working in Japan. They were working with the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, JUSE, and so their words are based around the concepts of production, if you like, but they step outside of production in all cases. But this is what Shewhart said: was there was specification, then production, then inspection. And Ilati says, well, if you put that into a cycle, you have specification, production, inspection. It tells you something about your specification, and you can go again. And that was in Shewart's 1939 book. You can see the reference there. Now, if you go on a number of years, if you go on 10, 12 years or so, we then get the Deming wheel. So Deming at this point, and it is quite clear, Deming claims that he used Shewhart's work and just built upon it. He studied what Shewhart was saying. He had a theory based on what his learnings were, and therefore came up with a new model or an improved model. And if you actually look at this model here, it is really interesting where, and Deming is now talking really strictly about the system of production, where he says, design the product, make it, test it in the production line, and then in the laboratory, put it on the market, making sure that your tests hopefully are demonstrated, tested in service. And that takes you down through 1, 2, 3. And then 5 was as a result of getting to 4, tested in service through market research, you're now back to study again, and then refresh and redesign the cycle again. So that's what Deming actually said. And he presented that to the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers in 1950. So that's quite an important time, because he presented it to them in 1950. And obviously that's 51 was when he printed that bit there. But if we now look at then something that happened at the 1950 JUSE seminar, and there was a gentleman whom I am certain all of you know of, and if you've been with me on my previous ones, it is the author of that book, Masaki Imai, who is the father of, effectively, Genba Kaizen. There's lots of fathers around here. So he was a member of the JUSE seminar, and they took Deming's work, his model, which you can see the detail in figure 5, where he says design. They said, right, they put some different words to it. They put the words plan. So product design corresponds to the planning. Do, that's a plan. Production is do. Sales is check. And research is action. So that was the very, very first time that plan, do, check, act emerged into the cycle of science learning. And as you can see then in the little icon in the bottom right-hand corner, the Japanese words for it, and the boxes on the bottom side actually came from that JUSE seminar. Now, the reports are that Deming wasn't massively pleased about this development. He was not hugely encouraged by this plan, do, check, act thing. And the reason was, and the words are written there from what Moen and Norman have said at the time, is that Deming during the 1980s warned his audience about plan, do, check, act version as it being inaccurate, because the English word check means hold back. So I'll put a little icon in there. Rich and I were looking for some icons before we started the seminar, and we both jointly came across the sloth as being probably the most representative one of there. But you'll also see down there is the checklist. And one of my experience is that certainly when I was taught plan, do, check, act back in the early 1980s, when I was first taught plan, do, check, act, I was taught the check was you have a checklist and you check off that you've done the things that you had in your plan. And it wasn't until maybe 5 or 6 years later, when I first came across the consultants from PMI in my business back then, that I actually realized I'd been taught incorrectly. And I think that's one of the things that really, really, really irritated Deming back in the time as well. So you see the two things in there are the checklist and moving slowly. And that's why Deming felt slightly less in favour, shall we say, of the concept of Plan, Do, Check, Act. I had, until this research, always believed that Plan, Do, Check, Act had emerged from Shewhart himself. So it was quite interesting to see it actually didn't actually come from Shewhart, but came from JUSI, the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, in 1950. Now, if you look at today's models of that, you will always still see Plan, Do, Check, Act. Plan, Do, Check, Act exists. If you go to Asia, you look through Japan, Plan, Do, Check, Act is prominent, really, really prominent. As I've already demonstrated, it's prominent in APQP, it's prominent in ISO 9000. But when you carefully look at what was actually meant by it, check had a couple of meanings to it, or has a couple of meanings to it. Check is, was it done? And what was the result? So it isn't just simply a checklist. It is, was the thing done? And what did you learn from doing about it? Which is effectively not that dissimilar from study. So the act of PDSA then, this is Shewhart's cycle. So Deming actually modified this, and it's great to actually see this because we've got these later words in there. So you can see 1986, PDSA of the PDSA. We've got it again. And then in 93, Deming, with the support of Moen and Norman and Ishikawa and a number of others, adopted this. So we now have PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act. So that's a little plotted history of Plan, Do, Study, Act, and where it came from, right? In essence, they are both models for learning. They are both scientific models for learning. So let's have a look then at how some of those PDSA cycles can actually be used. So if you joined my colleague Sean last week, you will have seen that he did a correlation between Plan, Do, Study, Act and the software. And it's just gone off the top of my head at the moment. The word, Rich, remind me of the word.
Agile.
Agile, thank you.
From
Yeah.
above, there you are.
From above, there we go.
Good job, I'm paying attention, isn't it?
It is, yeah, yeah. When you're thinking 3 slides ahead, I forgot what the word was. So agile, yeah. So agile. So the link between PDSA and agile, which I think was a really, really interesting seminar. If you haven't listened to it, it's really worthwhile digging into that and having a little listen because it's quite insightful. But he went through this and he explained. So where in our model of PDSA do we actually start? Now, for all of those of you that are PMI practitioners, you know the answer to this. But let me just start by saying this, is that if I want to get to, shall we say, to London from where I am at this present moment in time, I really do need to understand, if I'm going to make a travel plan, I need to know where I am. So before we can create a plan of any nature whatsoever, we need to have a deep understanding of what the current situation is. So study 0 is always where you start with Plan, Do, Study, Act. That allows us to understand what's the circumstances, where are we, what's going on here. It allows us to actually develop initial hypotheses and theories that then allow us to emerge a plan of we can do this. And so when we do that, we work on this, and you can see there we can now work out how will we know, what are we trying to accomplish, how will we know that any changes. We then do something, do a test, collect data. As I go back through this and we see some of Deming's stuff on there, if you notice in Deming's stuff, he said when he came to the do, it was either complete the project and then study the impact of the project, or if you're doing something in a continuous improvement way, do a little test. So it was either complete it or do a little test, depending on what it was. And actually that was quite refreshing for me to actually pick up and actually see. But whatever happens, whether we complete the task or we're just doing a little test to prove something, our next step is to study what actually happened. Compare our actual with prediction. Our actual with prediction. So what does that say? What does our results say about our theory? And then we can then act, which is adopt, adapt, abandon. And I'm not going to express that. Sean did it brilliantly last week. And we go around the cycle again and again. So if we actually have a little look at how does Plan, Do, Study, Act actually work in practice, and using some of that historical context that maybe came from Galileo and Bacon. So I've got scenario 1, and let's say our scenario is this, is that we've got a packing machine company that have observed that one of their machines failed to always insert the correct material into the pack, but they had absolutely no idea why. No idea why. So what's the first thing they're going to do with Plan, Do, Study, Act? I hear you all screaming at your computers. Plan days. No, I'm joking. Study, isn't it? We're going to study. And this is where actually the inductive study goes along. So what we need to do, we need to understand and create an experiment or some form of study to actually understand what is the machine doing. We observe what this machine is doing. We will then make some analysis of that. Now that analysis will allow us to be able to establish some theories, some ideas, some hypotheses about what's going on with this machine. So it could well be that what our theory is that red belts perform better than black. Now that's come from our observation. It's come from our analysis. It's an inductive theory that's been applied. So we can now take that and say, right, okay, if that is our hypothesis, red belts perform better than black. In our plan, what we now need to do is to design a trial where we can assess if the red belt performance, that we can assess the red belt performance directly against that of the black belt. Okay. Therefore, then in the do, we will conduct the tests. When we're conducting the tests, what we need to be doing is to study. So we've got our initial theory. So we've got a prediction that we think what might happen next. And we can then draw conclusions from it. So the study here is, the second study is deductive. And the question here is going to be, did the trial get done? And the evaluation is, how close to our prediction? How close to our prediction were the results we see? And from that, we can make some conclusions. Now, those conclusions could be that we've got enough data to move forward. It could be that, well, it was nearly right. We can go again, test it again. Or our conclusion could be, we're really on the wrong course here. We need to go back to and start to develop new hypotheses. But we've learned from it. So that inductive and deductive issues, that's the interplay between them. They both occur together, and it's just how we're doing it, in what place in the study cycle are we in. So if we move on, we've got scenario 2. Now, I've selected this one because of the Plan, Do, Check Act that appears in that APQP manual. So let me take this one. We've got an automotive component company are to induce a modified product following the prescribed process. Now, I don't know whether anyone on this call is anywhere near an automotive company or a manufacturing company. It doesn't really matter. But they've done their study. They've understood what's going on, what they think. But this automotive company are going to introduce a modified product following a prescribed process. So they know the process by which they introduce new products. And their theory is, if we get these things that are called part submission warrants completed by this date, this program will be successful. Now, part submission warrant is just an authority for a supplier to ship the part because they know it's good. So that's the theory. If we get these parts into this place by this time, we will be successful. So the plan is create a plan to do the work, to make sure that those submissions, you're following the process to get those submissions, and then do the work. And then from the other side, what we actually have is then the deductive element of it. So, all right, let me go. Oh, there we go. The deductive element of it is, right, so we know what our theory was. Our theory was that if we get the part submissions, right, so do the study. Did we get them? And what conclusion did we get? So the questions we're asking here in the check are going to be, did the work get done? So that's okay. But then again, was it done in the manner in which we expected? And did we get the results we anticipated? That's the study. All too frequently, you could get all of these part submission warrants, shall we say, and you check them off, say we've done them all, but they weren't followed or they weren't done in the manner in which you'd expected, and therefore you don't get the results that you'd hoped for. So your initial hypothesis could not be true. So that's the conclusion you could come to from that. So that's one where you are, it's not an improvement activity, it is you're actually following a project or a prescribed process. And if we then were to look at scenario 3, maybe a software solution team who are using Agile, the Agile project management, to develop the new software package. At each sprint review event, they establish the goals for the next 2-week phase. So we have the inductive model that's there, and their theory is we should develop these lines of code with these objectives in the next sprint. So the plan bit is create a plan that will allow us to test, well, to create and test the code. And then obviously the do bit is do it. And the study element of that is to now, again, we're now back to deducting, which is, did the work get done? That's the check. And did the code that we expect do exactly what we expected? So when we're doing a sprint for software, for example, we're checking, did that code that we designed and developed and tested, did it actually do what we hoped it would do? And again, we can come to a conclusion, and then we can go back into the act and go forward again. So that's the thing there. Now, one other point I would actually point out on, which fits into what Sean was talking about last week, if I put a ring around the induction and deductive element of it, that's effectively the sprint review. So for those of you that do Agile project management in your IT world, or even in a non-IT world, your sprint review will lead to an agreement as to what's the next piece of work going to be doing. You refine the knowledge as you get towards the next sprint review. 2 weeks later, you hold your sprint review and you go again. So this is where actually the sprint review in Agile is pretty much plan, do, study, act, plan, do, study, act as we go. Very good. So there's 3 scenarios in which plan, do, study, act. And from my perspective, I think you can consider plan, do, study, act and plan, do, check, act to be the same. I would not fall out with you if you were to use either. It doesn't really matter, providing the study or the check has that inductive or deductive element included within it. So further building on that then, Ron Moen and Cliff Norman, they also advocated and came up and were working with a couple of gentlemen by the name of Nolan and Provost. And in the paper that Richard is seeking for you, you will actually see a direct reference to how this model was created at the same time or in parallel to that, as PDSA was being PDSA'd and developed and brought into more common language. Nolan and Provost created this model for improvement. This is our 3-question model, which for me is actually a model pretty much for anything we do in business, where we have the first question, what is it we're actually trying to accomplish? The second question, which is, if we know what we're trying to accomplish, how will we know whether any changes in improvement? And then we drop into plan, do, study, act mode, where we can start saying, okay, what are the changes that we can make that would result in that improvement? Now that requires study, it requires a plan, doing action, it needs the inductive and the deductive elements to say, how are we going? But this model itself is a universal question at any level. It allows us or causes us to demand theories and prediction before action. So theories and prediction before action, that's that play between deductive and inductive science in that sense. And we go around the cycle as rapidly as we possibly can, providing we can keep on getting an answer to. So I'm coming pretty close to finishing up where I am. So remember, if you've got any questions, then please drop them into Rich and we'll have a go answering them. So the other point then, that towards the end of 1993, which is when Moen and Cliff Norman started to revise their theory about PDSA, Deming brought this around, the system of profound knowledge. He summarized his life work about this, and where we talk about the theory of knowledge in the system of profound knowledge, of system thinking, understanding variation, the theory of knowledge and psychology, the theory of knowledge is supported entirely by Plan, Do, Study Act, or if you have to be, if you wish to be associated with it, then Plan, Do, Check Act. You're not going to fall out with anybody, I don't think, in the performance improvement community if you use either Plan, Do, Check Act or Plan, Do, Study Act, providing your understanding of study and then the application of the plan and do and then the act. If you've got those correct, I don't think anyone's going to fall out with you. So as we approach the end on this then, just from my perspective, this is from my learning. I've been fortunate enough to be working with an organisation that have actively pursued Plan, Do, Study, Act. Not always perfectly, I have to say, but always tried to actually follow it. And the thing that I've learnt is this, is that the correct use of Plan, Do, Study, Act allows space for organisations and individuals to gain wisdom, to gain insight. And let me explain that a little bit more, because one of the things that we would say is knowledge. And let's face it, the Plan, Do, Check, Act process itself, if you're in study, will allow you to emerge knowledge. Knowledge is really, really important. So, but knowledge is really about facts and ideas that we acquire through that study, through research, through investigations, through observations, or just simply through life experience. That's how we gain knowledge. Now, wisdom, on the other hand, is wisdom or sapience, is the ability to think and act using the knowledge you've gained through study, research, investigation, observation, or experience. And with understanding, common sense, and insight, apply it. So wisdom is the ability to think and act using that knowledge, and with common sense and insight. And I found one little quote, which I found I'm going to leave, almost end this little presentation on. And it comes from someone called Oscar Wilde. And this is something, I remember being told this decades and decades ago. And it was this: only with age comes wisdom. But sometimes age comes alone. But age will come with wisdom if you understand and apply the fundamental principles behind Plan, Do, Study, Act, and you can apply them in your work, in your projects, and in your program. So as a summary for me, I think I'll go this way, is that PDSA, as we know it today, and as certainly we PMI teach it, has been subject to continual PDSA since Galileo and Bacon in the 1600s. PDCA and PDSA are both models that enable continual learning. PDSA is a model for continual improvements, for projects, for day-to-day, or life. Now, PDSA requires some form of context, and in my view, the three-question model that Nolan and Provost advocated gives PDSA purpose. And the final thing on this about PDSA, gaining knowledge, doing the right things, there is no law anywhere in the world that compels us to be wise or to have wisdom. That's down to you. Rich, that's me finished, mate, I think.
That's what you think, Des. Thank you very much. So we've had several comments on a couple of streams, questions really, asking for a recap of your slide 20, Des. If you could just jump back, particularly on the order, if you could just recap in terms of the where to start. And the point you made around the study zero, can you just step us through? We've got a couple of minutes, so it'd be useful just step us through that. We've had it in several places. So I think it's worth you doing, Des, if you may.
Okay, fine. Right. So it starts something like this. If I was to ask you to create a plan about something, so if I was to, and this is the analogy I always use when I'm in lecture rooms or anything like that. So if I want to go from this place where I am today to over the other side of the room, I need to have a plan as to how I'm going to do it. I need to have a plan. And to have a plan, I need to know where I am right now, because I won't be able to work out my route if I don't know where I am now. And so if you're asking someone to make an improvement on something, what is it they're improving? What is the facts at the moment? So to do that, we need to have study zero. Even with a project, where are we now needs to be understood, because you can't put a plan in place to go to a new place unless you really know where you are at this moment in time. So the detailed study allows you to develop theories or ideas about what you can do going forward. And then the plan bit comes next. That's allowing you to form initial hypotheses. Now you can see, if I go forward and we take Nolan and Provost's words, at this point though, we really need to establish, okay, what is it we are trying to accomplish? Right? And how will we know that any change is an improvement? I'll give you an example of one which I've dealt with on, it's one I use frequently. It's one that really entertained me at the time. Working with an organization who did a study, their initial hypothesis is that, or what they want to do, their plan was to introduce SAP. So everybody, I think, probably knows what SAP is. It's a fine product. I have no issue with it any particular which way. There are other systems available to you, so I'm not advertising it. They said that our plan is to introduce SAP. So what's our objective is to introduce SAP. What are we trying to accomplish was introduce SAP. And actually, when we actually got them to think about it, what they were actually trying to do was to improve the management of material and stock. So we needed to get that pretty sharp. So what are your hypotheses for being able to manage stock? So go forward on there on that one. Once we understand what it is we're trying to accomplish, and we've got a way of measuring it, we've got a plan, we can then do something. We should then be able to do something. Now, as I say, I think that as this model tends to, it says do something, test and collect data. It may well be if you're in a project, you simply have to implement. You've got to implement the project. But you should, though, try to collect data, because if you're going to introduce that, you're not going to do it in little bits, possibly. You might be doing it in a big program of activity. But do something, collect data to tell you how well things are going. Are the things that you're doing giving you the answers that you thought they would? And that's where we get to our second study. So we compare the actual with prediction. What does the results that we got say about our theory? If we've undertaken some work and we didn't get the answers, maybe there's something wrong with our theory, or maybe there's something wrong with the way we did the work. But what that enables us to do now then is to, if we've done the second study, we've seen the results that we've got from our test, or we've seen the results we've got from our application, from the work that we've completed, we can now do something. We can act upon that knowledge. We can either adopt and carry on with what we've got. Adopt was, we got everything we wanted, we can move on. We could adapt it, didn't quite get what we wanted, we can adapt it. And then we could probably go around the cycle again. Let's try to do it again. Or in some cases, we may have got completely different things to what we thought we would get, in which case we should abandon. One thing I've noticed, many organizations are absolutely fearful of ever abandoning anything. So it should be, if you've done something and you didn't get the answer you want, be prepared to abandon. If you're adopting or adapting or even abandoning, that allows you next to develop new theories. So we can come to plan 2, we can go again. Plan 2, we can then go back through it again. We've got more theories, more informed knowledge from our previous run, and we go again. And every day, the world has endless opportunities for learning, endless opportunities for improvement, endless opportunities for fun and joy in making things better. And then that allows you to go around again. You keep going round and again and again. So Rich, did that help
Thanks,
any of
Des.
your
That's
delegates?
great. Yeah, it's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Good.
Cool. So if you could just skip forward to the final slides, that'd be really useful, Des. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, you may know that we have a certified master black belt program that's available to join throughout the year, but our latest cohort is currently recruiting. We're building that up to start the 2022 run. You can find out more details at pmi.co.uk/training. You'll also find on our website some testimonials in the Knowledge Hub of people that have been part of that program. They're fascinating, really interesting to watch. So do have a look at the Knowledge Hub and find out more. As you know, we love to talk, so don't hesitate to get in contact with us either via the website or contact details are on there or the social pages. And finally, this was number 71, I've checked. So next week is number 72, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the final PMI Friday webinar, ahead of us launching the brand new and exciting PMI Live series in January 2022. So next week, we're out with a bang on the 10th of December. Why Toyota consultants struggle to implement change outside of Toyota. So my colleague Sean Buckland, it's going to be a belter, so do register on the website, pmi.co.uk/webinars, as you can see below, and we will hopefully see you there. You can see my Q&A flashing up. Yes, okay, got a clearance on that one. Thank you, Des, for that clarification. And so all that remains to be said is from Des, myself, and Tiberius back there, and everyone at PMI, thank you very much for joining us. Have a happy, relaxing, and safe weekend. Thanks, everyone.